Hello and welcome to Chapter 13 in International Business, talking about exporting and global sourcing. As we know, exporting is one way of doing business in a foreign country. It's actually the least risky way of doing business in foreign countries. And most people, most companies, if you're not an MNE, if you're a small or medium enterprise, SME, most of the time you're going to start by exporting, see how it goes with exporting because there's not a lot of risk there, and then either invest or do some foreign direct investment or something like that for your manufacturing, or maybe license or joint venture or something like that. Exporting is the least riskiest, but oftentimes it's the most costliest because you've got transportation into the foreign country, you've got export taxes, you've got import taxes, which drives up the cost of your products. So a lot of people, after they're successful in another country, will do different things beyond exporting to try to lower their costs. And most people can understand that. Then we're going to talk about global sourcing. We're going to talk about not only sourcing raw materials globally, which we've already talked about, but really outsourcing business functions and business processes like human resources and financial. And then we're also going to talk about, really at the end, we're going to talk doing it so that we have global responsibility or corporate responsibility. So with that being said, this is going to be done in two parts. With that being said, let's get to part one. So as I said in the video, today we are going to talk about exporting and global sourcing. Exporting truly is the firm's least riskiest entry strategy. The reason is because you really don't have a whole lot of investment. All you have to do is sell in another country. And if it doesn't sell in the other country, if the product's already selling in your country, well, then you can always take it back and you can get rid of it in your own country. So it's very popular with small and medium enterprises. Usually large enterprises are going to go out and they're going to do some type of foreign direct investment. But generally speaking, exporting has a great deal to do about trade deficits, trade surpluses, all of those types of things, all has to do with exporting. Most exports involve merchandise. However, services are also exported as well. A lot of architectural services, a lot of insurance services, entertainment. Look at the NBA in China. It's absolutely huge. You can look at hotel services that are exported. Marriott is worldwide. Generally speaking, though, when we talk about exports, we're talking about merchandise. We're talking about goods that are produced here in the United States and sold in other countries. The advantages of exporting, as you can see, increased sales volume, that opens up a global market. You can generate better profits. You can generate better economies of scale. And economies of scale, especially in manufacturing, because as you open up new markets, you can manufacture more. You can get your costs down. It stabilizes. It also helps stabilize global as well as regional economic upturns and downturns. If the United States is on a downturn, you can export into a country that is not. Right now, the whole world is on a downturn because of the coronavirus. So it really minimizes risk, and it actually really flattens, speaking of flattening the curve, it actually flattens the peaks and valleys of economic slowdowns and economic upturns. The disadvantage of exporting, compared to FDI, generally speaking, it's more expensive. So you don't make as much money on the particular product as you would if you would, say, manufacture it in that particular country. For instance, if I want to export to Spain, I have transportation costs, I have exporting costs. I also usually have some type of import tax from Spain. If I'm manufacturing at Spain, I don't have any of those. So it's actually cheaper on a cost per item for FDI than exporting. So that's one of the disadvantages. The other disadvantage of exporting is you lose control of your products. Once you export it, You are at the mercy of your export agent. If they want to lower the price of your product, then globally your product price is lowered. You can't dictate what they sell it for. So it exposes the firm to a lot of different problems with regards to their product. It also exposes the firm to tariffs, trade barriers, and other things like that. So really, your systematic approach to exporting is, number one, you got to assess the market opportunity. Is it worth exporting? Is there a market out there that wants your product or your service? Number two, you've got to understand, how am I going to do it? Am I going to involve other people? Am I going to involve export merchandisers? Am I going to involve agents and brokers? Then once you decide what you need, you've got to go acquire those skills. Now, you can either acquire those skills internally and hire people, agent exporters, things like that, or you can go out and you can buy it on the open market through consulting firms and through third parties. And then finally, you implement that exporting strategy. All those three things, or excuse me, all those four things, a firm needs to take a look at. Now, as we talk about exporting, as you know, different firms make different products for different industries, and it's really, there's not one common way to export. So really this chapter, as I said in the introduction, this chapter is all about what should you think about as you're trying to export. What should you think about when you're going into another country? So there's indirect exporting and there's direct exporting. You can read it there, but indirect exporting means you're contracting with an intermediary in your own country. So basically, what you're doing is you're selling the product to an intermediary in your own country who then takes the product and exports it for you. That's called indirect exporting. Bausch and Lomb used to do that in Latin America. We had a company in Miami. We would sell the products to those company in Miami. That company then would take it and export those contact lenses and pharmaceuticals to Latin America. The problem is, with indirect exporting, once you sell that product to that company in Miami, they can sell it to anybody they want, including it can go back into the United States, which is what we call the gray market. It's not illegal, but it's unintended to go to that market. So what we used to do for that company in Miami is we would sell them a contact lens. Say the contact lens cost $20. We would sell it to them for $10 because of PPP in Latin America, right? Purchasing power parity in Latin America. They had to make some money. Well, they would take that $10 contact lens and then they would sell it for $17 in the United States and make a lot more money than they would have had they sold it for $12 in Latin America. That's called the gray market. So that's the problem with indirect exporting. Direct exporting is actually contracting with intermediaries in that foreign market. And then also you can do company-owned exporting, which means selling it to your own subsidiary in a foreign market. That's the safest way because then you can control what that person does with it. So here's a really good model. So if you look at your exporter, you can go domestic or you can go into your own staff, and that's into the in your own market. So if you look at that red line there, you look at this red line right here. Okay, this red line, it means this is in your own market or your export market. So you can either use a domestic intermediary or your own staff internally. And then you can either use a foreign intermediary or a company intermediary and then sell it through a wholesale or retail. And then you have your foreign buyer. Generally speaking, your foreign buyer is the end user. Really good model here that talks about that. So as you export, you're going to need export documentation. You're going to need export documentation in your own country, and you're going to need export documentations in the new country. Most of it is for tax and tariffs, tax for your own country. So if you're going to sell something in, say, Spain or the United Kingdom or any place in the EU, we need to make sure that there's documented here so that the company can be taxed on it. The other thing is there needs to be documentation for the country in which you're selling it into so that that country can levy their tax, their tariffs, or their quotas. So you've got your quotation or pro forma invoice. There's the definition of it right there. Please study that. You have your commercial invoice. There's a definition of that right there. And then you have your bill of lading, which is your contract between your exporter and your shipper. You can read that right there. Other export documentation is export declaration. You can read the definition there. Your certificate of origin. It's almost like a birth certificate where the country is coming from. And then your insurance certificate. Oftentimes in the black market, all of these documentations are forged and really fabricated. Also in the gray market, oftentimes these export documentations are forged or counterfeit. Now let me talk about the difference between the black market and the gray market. The black market is selling something that's illegal. Illegal drugs coming into this United States is the black market. The gray market is selling into a particular market or to a particular consumer that the product is not meant to be. The largest gray market out there is guns and ammunition. So let's say that we want to sell guns to a foreign friendly country. Let's say, for instance, we want to sell guns to the UK. The UK is a very friendly country. So we use an exporter to sell that to the UK. We sell the guns to the exporter to be sold into the UK. That exporter then buys the guns and sells it to an entity that we don't want guns sold to. That is the gray market. It's not a black market because that person had authorization to sell guns, but they sold it not to the market that was meant to be. That's called the gray market. Black market is when you're selling something illegal. So that's really important to understand when you're talking about exporting, the difference between the black market and the gray market. Most people don't know that. So that makes a good trivia question, or it makes good discussion with some people because they don't really understand the difference between the gray market and the black market. So then you have your methods of payments. Your method of payments usually is cash in advance. So if I'm going to sell it to an export agent in Spain, I want cash in advance. It's best for me. Or there's an open account. That's easy for the exporter who says, I'm going to open an account with you. I'm going to pay in 30 days. I'm not going to give you your cash now. I'm going to pay in 30 days. That's the best for the exporter because then he can get rid of or she can get rid of the product in that particular country, use that money to pay you back. There's also a letter of credit, and a letter of credit is just like that. It's like a credit card, which means you don't have to pay the whole thing back. I will charge you interest if you don't. So an open account means that you owe it to me. I'm going to sell you these pens. I'm going to sell you these pens. I'm going to sell you 1 million of these pens. You're going to export them into Spain. I'm going to open that account in 30 days. You owe me $1 million, $1 each for the pen. A letter of credit says that I'm going to give you up to $1 million in pens. You pay me when you can, but if you don't pay me in 30 days, I'm going to charge you interest. A lot of international exporting is done on counter trade. Counter trade is an international business transaction where partial of the payment or all the payment is not done in money. It's done with something else. Generally speaking, we see a lot of counter trade with our services. For instance, we'll help build an oil well, but we want a percentage of the oil. We'll help build a pipeline to get oil out of the country, but we want a percentage of the oil. We might do a counter trade and say we are going to, say in India, we're going to put up cell towers. But what we want is instead of you paying me for the cell tower, what I want is a percentage of business that's going through that cell tower, or I want to use that cell tower for my own business in order to compete with you. For instance, Verizon might say, I will help you put up cell towers in India. India can use my cell towers, which, so you've got, say, India phone company, but also Verizon can use my towers, so the Indian people can use Verizon as the service as well as the Indian company. It's risky because people can renege very, very, very easily on that. You build that oil well for me, yeah, wait, you watch and see how much oil you get out of it. I can also say that, you build that cell tower for me, and yeah, I'll give you a percentage of the revenue coming out of there, and then I'll cheat on the percentage of the revenue coming out of there. So counter trade is very, very risky because of reneging on the counter trade, and also it's really, really difficult to understand how much is really running through it in order to get a fair price on it. That'll take care of part one. We'll be back in part two in just a minute.